Welcome to the CIO Evolution. In this podcast, we'll explore the Chief Information Officer's role in executing a new ongoing leadership imperative, digital transformation that promotes agility and resilience. How do CIOs upgrade legacy networks? What are the financial challenges CIOs face? And what are the security measures that are required in the new work from anywhere, mobile and cloud-based world?
Welcome to the CIO Evolution, one of 3 podcast shows available on CXO Revolutionaries, sponsored by Zscaler. I'm your host, Chris DeRusha, Director of CXO Revolutionaries and Community. Ever since the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack in 2021, there's been more attention and effort placed on securing our nation's critical infrastructure. To get a sense of progress, we recently held a panel discussion with Federal Chief Information Security Officer and Deputy National Cyber Director Chris DeRusha and former CIO for the state of Wisconsin, David Cagigal. The panel was moderated by Kavitha Mariappan, Executive Vice President of Customer Experience and Transformation at Zscaler. Take a comfortable seat and enjoy the recording of this important industry briefing and learn what it will take in terms of collaboration, information sharing, resource optimization, and more to defend our nation's assets for the collective good.
I'm Kavitha Mariappan, Executive Vice President of Customer Experience and Transformation at Zscaler. Today, we are honored to be joined by 2 leading executive voices in the public sector. Chris DeRusha, the Federal Chief Information Security Officer in the Office of Management and Budget, EOMB, and David Cagigal, the former state of Wisconsin Chief Information Officer. Over the next 45 minutes, we will discuss, and I hope debate, arguably the most important cybersecurity topic as it affects us all, critical infrastructure. We're really looking forward to your participation in today's conversation. So please do add your questions and comments in the comments field, and we will do our very, very best to answer as many questions as possible. So let's get this LinkedIn Live moving along. Gentlemen, welcome and good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Fantastic to have you both here. So I wanted to kind of set the stage and potentially, really start with the public cybersecurity state of union. Let's kind of lay the foundation and the framework for our conversation today. And Chris, I'm going to kind of cue you up and start with you a little bit. Defending critical infrastructure is notably the first pillar in the Biden administration's national cybersecurity strategy. But we've seen a lot of cyber threats around today. I mean, as you know, it's prolific, it's robust, it's everywhere. Why is cybersecurity such a priority for this administration in general, and specifically around protecting critical infrastructure?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Kavitha. And first of all, just again, thank you for having me here today. Look, we got a great opportunity a few months ago to put out our national cyber strategy. And as you note, there's a huge focus. First pillar is critical infrastructure. And look, it's simple, right? We're in the digital age, and this technology that we're all relying on kind of underpins every aspect of our lives. If you look at functioning of our economy, operation of critical infrastructure, delivery of key services to state, local levels, even you could say in elections, we're talking about the underpinnings of our democracy and our institutions. So, it's really everything. And the president articulated a clear vision earlier this year of where we're going to head. And I think what is foundational there is there's a couple pillars to that, right? Like the first shift that we need to make and ensure that we're focusing on is that the most capable organizations here, the ones with the most resources, really need to start assuming a greater share of the burden for addressing and mitigating this risk. We can't continue on in a model where the burden of good cybersecurity can continue to fall on the consumer, on small businesses, and sort of those with the least resources. And so that's like a big, vision shift for us. And it means we have a huge role too, to lead by example, because the US government is one of those most resourced. And the second sort of foundational underpinning of the strategy is that we've really got to be prioritizing increasing incentive structures for long-term investments in resilient infrastructure and cybersecurity, secure by design principles, and all of the software products we're putting out, right? So we've been working on that for a couple of years since the administration started, but we're talking about needing to go bigger and continue on that path. And back to my role as the federal chief information security officer, sitting over all the federal agencies, I've got a big role to play here, because at the end of the day, we own a lot of the critical infrastructure ourselves at the federal level, or a significant portion, and we've got to ensure that we're starting here and leading by example by really kind of ensuring resilient design in all of our systems. And we've made big investments in modern security architecture changes and zero trust. We've also are making big investments through our technology modernization fund in modernizing legacy and old IT. So, I think that the short of it is there's lots to do across the entire nation, and we're both leading that effort, but also leading by example.
I mean, it's great to see. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's confidence building to know that this is such a critical agenda item for the administration and kind of all the affiliated agencies, and how that has an impact across state and local government entities as well. I think it'll be interesting also, Chris, and then in a second, I've got some questions for David as well. Let's define critical infrastructure at the federal level real quick, from your perspective. I mean, as you touched upon, there are implications that are far and wide reaching, right? That's, national, international safety. There's, impact around kind of our geopolitics, our economy, and, loss of human life. I mean, it transcends everything. Other people cannot grasp what critical infrastructure really means until we see kind of it truly defined, and how we are at various states of digitization or exposure of said critical infrastructure today, here in the United States, as well as across many of the nations across the world that we trade with, we keep peace in the world with, right, and all of the above. So it'd be really great to hear from you what from a federal perspective, federal government perspective, you define as critical infrastructure specifically.
Yeah, for sure. Well, DHS, CISA has defined 16 different critical infrastructure sectors. So, that's kind of runs the gambit from anywhere from financial, oil and gas, transportation, kind of, there's a broad cross section. And how we manage that is, we try to pair expertise of a lead agency, which in many cases is DHS, with the expertise of a sector-specific agency or sector risk management agency, as we like to call them. So, for example, you have Department of Treasury and Homeland Security will partner together and work with, the financial services ISAC as kind of one ecosystem. And you find the same like healthcare and energy kind of go across. Like, we've got each of those agencies providing deep expertise in understanding their industry, which is really important when you're talking about in particular OT, getting out of IT and getting into like, how does the OT work in certain spaces? That can be really tricky and not well understood. So you kind of have to have, and there's just different types of regulations involved in each industry, et cetera. So, that's kind of how we manage it, but it's a huge cross section of that we tag as critical infrastructure here in the United States.
Thank you for that, David. Moving on to you a little bit, perhaps if you can kind of help illustrate to our audience what it means to be a security leader at a state level, and also kind of what are some of the challenges in your day-to-day job in terms of securing critical infrastructure from that perspective, from a cyber perspective. That will be one part of my question. Obviously, the next part of my question is going to be, did you feel well resourced to do what you needed to do?
Thank you for the question, Kavitha. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Chris and the state of Michigan. We stand on their shoulders. They were very innovative in all facets of cybersecurity. David Behan and Dan Lorman and Chris himself. And that was, I think, a classic example of information sharing. those two states were joined at the hip. And we learned so much because our Adjutant General had a rapport with the Adjutant General from Michigan. He brought the two CIOs together, brought the CISOs together, and we just continued to leverage all that Michigan was pioneering in the spirit of cybersecurity. So many thanks. We stole shamelessly from Michigan. We were able to do a lot of things that had made Wisconsin much more stronger in cyber defense. So to get on with your question, Kavitha, at the state level, we might want to consider somewhat of a mirroring effect, because we had a Department of Health Services, much like the Department of Health Services and federal level. We had PSC, Public Service Commission, regulating our utilities, our natural gas, our water. So there are state agencies that very much look like the federal agencies, but drilling down more specifically the specific demographics of a state, the challenges. As you know, Wisconsin sits in the middle of the country, so we don't have coastal issues to deal with. We don't have a lot of hurricanes, and et cetera, et cetera. So our challenges are a bit different in the Midwest, but they remain the same. Our critical infrastructure can be just as damaging from a physical event or from a cyber event that requires us to respond. And when I first became involved with the National Guard in the incident response planning effort, we had to identify the fact that we needed partnerships at the federal level and at the state level in multiple agencies. I think Chris would understand that not all agencies are ready to communicate across each other. So they're basically charged with the responsibilities for the particular discipline. But as CIOs and CISOs, we transcend that. We don't respect those boundaries, so to speak, but we need to bring them together in a collaborative manner to say that we're all in this together. If you think about it just for a second, we are enjoying the critical infrastructure as we speak. We've got broadband connections. We've got computers that are networked. We've got a segment of the infrastructure helping us deliver this message today on the backbone of the critical infrastructure. And I might add, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we might want to add the elections to the government facilities. There was talk about making it number 17, but I think they embedded it into one of the 16 government facilities, and that's where it resides today. There was a tremendous amount of effort there expended in 16 election, 2018, 2020, every 2 years, not just the presidential elections. But on a resource basis, Chris and I plead every day that we really don't have enough money. We really don't have enough resources. And it's an argument that will continue today and tomorrow as the technology trends increase upward. The cybersecurity threats travel with that trend line. So as we are investing in technologies, whether it be people or sensors, it introduces a significant amount of vulnerabilities that we have to be prepared to address. So we'll talk about this more later, but Chris and I are in a regulatory manner. We don't own the resources. We don't have boots on the ground at every sensor, at every station, ensuring that it operates, but we regulate and we try to provide a greater degree of context of the importance of the infrastructure. If you're a consumer or if you're a CEO of an organization, you depend on the critical infrastructure of this country.
Thank you for that, David. I think, as a common citizen, I know listening to both of you, right? Sort of, Chris, you setting the stage for what it looks like from an agency level at the federal level, David, you unpacking that at state, local government level. I feel like we're in the matrix. There is so many layers to this, so many handoffs, protocols, and it begs the question of ownership of critical infrastructure, funding, the technical debt, the process debt, and the skills debt, in terms of dealing with some of this. So I wanted to kind of move to one of the most recent incidents that really brought to light this scenario. I mean, we've had many incidents, cyber incidents, but let's talk about the Colonial Pipeline attack. Not sure if it was because we were all kind of in shelter in place at that time, and everybody was in front of a screen and we were able to witness this. Not sure if the act, the cyber act was critically nefarious, more than anything else had been. But whatever it was, it brought to bear, really exposed it to, I think not just to folks involved, at the government level, but to a common citizen that, hey, this can happen to us and it could shut us down. And everybody kind of started to pay attention to what cyber attacks were. And, what it was, I think, a real inflection point for all of us, right? So, how does the federal government and the state local government kind of interplay, in kind of dealing with this? Chris, I want to start with you. It was an inflection point. Was this an inflection point, or is it just, our interpretation of it in terms of critical infrastructure protection?
Well, look, it was certainly a key event. There's no question about it. You brought in a whole cross-section of stakeholders, people just trying to fill the gas tank into the equation, feeling one of these events. We as professionals, three of us, feel these events kind of maybe daily. But I think that really did matter for a lot of reasons. And I think it also kind of kickstarted some really important questions for us, the administration, right? Which is, hey, we've got a lot of limited authorities. We've had a largely voluntary approach over the past decade towards working with critical infrastructure. Certain segments have been regulated more than others, but it's not consistent across those 16 sectors, right? And there's some work to do there. And so despite all of that progress that we've made, which we definitely have seen progress through the voluntary approaches and all the operational collaboration between federal, state, and critical infrastructure owners, operators, no question, like we've moved forward. But it's not sufficient. It's not sufficiently resilient to ensure and say that we can ensure our national security and public safety. And you learn that in moments like these, when these disruptions occur. And so what are we going to do about that? We have an answer, right? We outlined it in the strategy, but, we really need minimum cybersecurity requirements for critical infrastructure. And I think that how you do that, you need to be, cautious in that. It's going to be a close partnership to move forward with the private sector and municipal owners and operators of the infrastructure. But there are a few principles, for a framework that, could lead to some new regulations. I'm happy to outline them if that's helpful. The first is that regulation should have the lightest touch possible, but no lighter. Second, baseline regulations need to be harmonized with existing requirements that these sectors already face. We've got to reduce duplication of rules and assessments. And I think there's opportunity as we create new to harmonize and to get rid of, old. Third, baseline regulations need to be developed collaboratively with industry so that they're cost aware, that they're based on sound risk management principles, and they're actually going to get the outcomes that we're seeking. And last, the proof of compliance with harmonized baseline requirements will be reciprocated across regulators with jurisdiction over companies, so that we can have a world where the company needs to demonstrate compliance once. And look, I don't think you'd hear any of us say that those principles will be easy to achieve. But what we're saying is we've got to do something new and different. We got to do it with the folks who are running the infrastructure, to get it right. and we're going to do that, and I think that is a new tone, but we're trying to set it out of the gate, collaboratively, and also sort of making sure that people really understand we're serious about harmonization. So one of the things that we did recently is we actually released an RFI on regulatory harmonization, and we're going to be getting a lot of feedback on that. We're quite sure, in a couple of months, and we're really looking forward to really deeply going through that and learning how we do this in the right way.
Look, I think directionally this is spot on, right? Recognition and sort of a bias for action and a sense of urgency and putting some frameworks around what needs to be done and driving that through kind of some form of a regulatory mandate. I think that's it's all directionally, awesome. But I wanted to open this up to both of you on that note, right? Part of this is ownership of critical infrastructure. There are some statistics that have been bandied around saying, well, 85% of the United States critical infrastructure is privately owned. We also question these stats. Whatever it is, I think if it's north of 50%, it's a question to be answered. How do we, being identified? Let me just take an example of a utility company, right? We recognize, the infamous utility company here in the state of California. As I live here in Napa, I brace myself for fires all the time in the summer months. And with that utility, for example. But let's just take that and say, okay, there is, power and electric, gas is recognized to be a critical infrastructure. Thus, they are, bound by certain regulatory requirements. Let's talk about enforcement of that at, not just at the federal level, but at the state level. I know, David, with you weighing in as well. How do you enforce that they are audited and they are at the, they're moving forward, right, with digitizing and with putting the right sort of, safety measurements, whether it be physical as well as cyber, security measures in place, and what does that time frame look like? I'm just kind of throwing a hypothetical example out there, but just saying, if we use ownership and identification and enforcement as levers, how do we enforce these? Not a crystal ball question, just whatever you can answer. I would love to hear from, David, maybe from the state level, and then Chris from a federal level.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
I can. I was a CIO for a utility, natural gas and electric, from 2004 to 2011. And we went through FERC audits. And the focus back then, before cybersecurity, was terrorism, physical assaults. And we had to pass those audits, and they were frequent, and there were $1 million a day penalties associated with anything that we failed to do. Very costly. We feared those penalties, so therefore we got an early read on what the audits were going to be about, the scope and breadth of them, and to make sure that we were capable of passing the audits, and they were frequent. And so, all hands on deck when we had an audit scheduled from a FERC organization coming in. And it was a tightly run utility, and that's one of utilities across the states that they were all being audited for the same reasons. And now add, after I've left, the cybersecurity layer to that. To me, that's even more complicated. One of the challenges they have is being able to understand the differences between OT and IT. IT is somewhat traditional, decades of protection. OT has been somewhat very resilient, but not under attack. And the control room within a facility is well protected. But the cybersecurity threat has increased enormously because they're connected to the network. They're not supposed to be connected to the network, but somehow a vendor may come in and plug into, they phone home and they do their diagnostics, and it's open for a little bit. But they cannot afford to have anything happen on the OT side, considering all the sensors, not so much the people, but the sensors that run a power plant or any manufacturing plant. All sensors are vulnerable if they're connected to a network. So from a regulated utility point of view, the federal organization and the Public Service Commission, if they're not investing accordingly, they're not going to get their rate increases. And one of the things that the adjutant general and I, we pleaded with the Public Service Commission to bring the utilities in one by one. And that was an easy ask, and they did. And they had to attest to the fact that, what are their cyber security plans? What are their incident plans look like? What does recovery look like? So they walked that through us. And I'm hoping that they continue on with that analysis of the utilities, both natural gas and power. Chris, I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up, the state level first, really quick. As chief security officer in Michigan, very similar story, right? Where we were working together as a team with our adjutant general, with Michigan State Police, state CIO, state CSO, and And we had a lot of collaborative relationships with different critical infrastructure entities. And in part, we even had, like, for healthcare, we had a healthcare council that we sat on, and I would kind of participate in those meetings and their direction as a sector in the state. There's a lot of regional fabric that you can work together on too, right? To kind of, a lot of common dependencies that they all have, and they all have to kind of work with the governor and governor's various senior officials. So, I think, the ecosystems in state are very, very important, but then you do have the federal layer where you have various regulated sectors. I think, like, one that is probably most top of mind for, what can you do to enforce, like how can you go about that? Is go back to colonial pipeline examples. You look at what TSA did with their pipeline directives that they put out, and these. I think the first thing to note about them is they've had to be updated, and but that's okay, right? They started 21, 22, 23, and there's been a lot of feedback as they became very real to the folks who had to comply with them. Federal government's been listening and working to get that right. And again, that's the lesson we need to parse everywhere, so that we're not learning in pockets. That, like, what TSA has done here, we will take as learnings to inform all sectors. Right? That's the mentality that we want to push for and need. But a lot of it is largely kind of what David's talking about. Where you're forcing accountability, right? Where they have to submit their plans for review and approval, like their cybersecurity assessment plans, how they're going to ensure that they're following the right practices. They've got to give the results of those assessments up, and kind of get the just assurance from the federal government that they're testing for the right things, that they're putting plans of action milestones behind the things that they've found in those assessments. Recovery plans David mentioned, incident response plans, just ensuring that they're testing for those things. I think the real thing here, though, is you have to find a way to ensure that it's not a compliance exercise or thought of as compliance exercise, right? Because then you're dead in the water, right? Right? It's people need to understand you really want to actually test your recovery plan. Because you're really going to kick yourself when you're in it if you didn't. And
through mitigation,
that's the culture change, right? Kavitha, it's the culture change that we're trying to work on here, and not just make these new requirements, but make them sort of part of functional business operations.
Right. No, it makes so much sense. I think the notion of separating risk management from true security. Right. If we really think about kind of security compliance and then risk management, rather than saying, my security strategy is all about compliance and audit, that doesn't work. Right. Like you said, you're a DOA at that point. And what is every entity doing in terms of ensuring that you're truly looking at your risk mitigation from an operational and a technology and a process perspective, right? I was talking to a CISO recently who said, my entire team spends more time on audits than we have to go back and actually put the right tech in place. We bought a bunch of stuff 2 years ago. We haven't rolled it out because the whole team's stretched thin, looking at identity management solutions, and we're looking at dealing with audit. And then there's the additional headache of obviously our cyber insurance that we're dealing with, which is another list of audits, right? So if we really think about kind of how are we handling risk, truly assessing risk. So that goes to kind of my next kind of pivot. And David, you also mentioned
Kavitha, before you move on, just to add on to this topic, Chris said something very important, that we're not walking through these exercises blindly. We are sincerely committed to the success of these exercises, making sure that they are designed to address the situation. There are situations in which a utility is going to be impacted physically or by cyber. There's a transfer of control to either law enforcement or the military, depending on the degree of the attack. Now, understanding all that, one-off, we're very successful. But if there are multiple attacks in multiple cities, in multiple countries, do we have the resources to be able to exponentially address these issues? So that's something that comes at the tail end of an exercise. We're good. We satisfied the requirement of the plan for this organization, for this utility, for this incident. But what if there are multiple incidences? That is a deep concern for all of us. And in fact, all of us are really lacking in the cyber professionals that we really need at all levels, federal, state, and local government. I didn't want to lose that train of thought.
No, I think that's spot on. I think, it kind of ties up what we all said. We would rather not be dealing with an incident, right? I would rather an incident be a non-event. And it's good to have all these, you're doing all the tabletops, you're putting the protocol in place, you're having all the handoffs in terms of what that incident response protocol and in transparency around an incident looks like. But that really takes us to how do we prevent these incidents from actually becoming an event, right? And you had also touched upon how, OT, the legacy of OT and how OT needs to not, ensuring that, OT systems are not connected to the network, right? So I would love to move forward. We want our sensors to be digitized. We want to leverage as much as we can innovation and technology in terms of how we run IoT, OT, and IT. But that takes a very different approach to how we design, how we look at network security going forward. And I wanted to move on to kind of really talking about zero trust security as kind of the sanction adopted model by most of the community. And it has been endorsed by the Biden administration, right? With the EO really focusing on zero trust and CISA being given this kind of, mandate to really look at a revised zero trust security model. And we see the US government clearly backing this approach. And then we see also, other governments around the world, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Germany, all of them, also following suit, kind of everybody's crowding around zero trust as a framework. It's not a standard, as an approach that we can all kind of, stand behind, specifically around securing critical infrastructure. So let's kind of, David, what both of you actually, Chris, you or David, either one of you can go first. What do you think of, what are your thoughts around the zero trust security model that obviously the administration is endorsing, and what work have either of your organizations done around this today?
Yeah, Dave, you want me to go first on the kind of federal lens? So, I kind of like we said there, showed that the administration is endorsing, that was a decision that we kind of made in the first couple of months of the administration, because there's a lot of confusion around the term, right? And I think you sort of heard both perspectives of like, let's move away from this, or like let's kind of lean into it. And leaning into it meant defining it, and that's what we did. Because in the end of the day, you can say it means too many things. You can say it's a buzzword. It's also right. It's also like, when you look into the principles of it, the maturity models that have been developed by the NSA and CISA and NIST's guidance, like this is practicing good security, right? And it's building off of, what we've learned over the years. And it is what will reduce drastically, like a pure implementation of zero trust architecture and principles will drastically reduce down attacks. It won't stop them, but it will reduce the noise, hopefully to a manageable level, which is really the goal at the end of the day. And, I think like what we did is we put out a policy memo strategy for federal government that said, hey, look, we're going to use a maturity model. We're going to say, these are the pillars. These are the actions within the pillars that are going to get you moving on the train, get on the road. There were things that we knew some people had started, most had not, different phases of maturity, but they all need to do them, right? Like, and, look at identity, like, just things like moving towards consolidated single sign-on and getting phishing resistant MFA in place. Just kind of like going through that painful culture change consolidation in a large federated enterprise, right? Of getting those things right. And they've also just forced movement, momentum, good conversations around. So they've helped with budgeting priorities. We can map now tooling, service plays, even hiring of key positions, creating a PMO to run it, all that can be mapped and you can get a number over like how much you're spending on your priority, which is really helpful when you're working with your budget colleagues who kind of need to know they're dealing with, 1,000 programs. It's like, so what you're saying zero trust means X dollars. Great, right? Like, and you can distill it to that with all the data and the verification model below, up and down, but my team can do that. And I can just say like, yes, like we have all that, we can show you it's here. Trust us, this is the number that we need. Can't get it all this year. Fine, let's do half here, half there. Right. You put you're at the right trade space of discussion around how to get these things funded and moving, because that's just, without the money, without the people, it's just a good idea, and so we've been focused on like kind of all those key enabling pillars as we've been modernizing and throwing out now.
Oh,
So let me build on that, Chris. Well said. That's exactly where most organizations are. Decades of cyber defenses with a very implicit culture. And zero trust is simply saying we can't trust everyone to have everything. I equate it, we've been living in zero trust for so long and people don't know it. When you have a bank account with Chase Bank, do you think they let you in and access all accounts? They only allow you to access your account. The same thing would apply for a business. I'm going to give you credentials. I'm going to give you an ID, a password, and you're going to access that application, only that application, because that's what your job is for. So why is organizations resisting this transformation, if you will? And I think it starts from the bottom up, that many organizations have trained their people to support that particular product, and that person is a threat to their career and to their job and their livelihood if they have to learn a different product. And in some cases, they're speaking to the leadership. They don't want to change. So whether the change is being instilled from the bottom or whether from the top, some organizations are paralyzed when they hear zero trust because they really don't understand it. And if they could just simplify and say, today's world, today's defense is too liberal, if you will. It needs to be tightened up and it needs to be more controlled. And to the extent that you can segment access, if you can authorize only certain people to access the application needed, you're going to be miles ahead than you were before. So if we can look at zero trust as an investment, as an inflection point, as a pivot to be able to move, and then the next question is, where do I start? And NIST's document, the maturity model and the pillars are a great place to say, this is where I'm at. I'm at the second level and I need to go a couple more levels higher over time, not by tomorrow, but over time. You build a roadmap, you establish priorities with funding and with resources. At least you know you're moving in the right direction and you're not paralyzed, you're not doing anything. So I think that gives the private sector confidence when the public sector, the federal government, is making inroads. And Chris, I think you would agree, you're not where you need to be yet, but at least you're starting in that direction. The presidential order on May 12th, 2021, 14028, advocating that zero trust direction, along with many other things for cyber defense, was a stake in the ground, and agencies are on the clock and they have to be moving in that direction. Private sector should be watching every single step because that's where they all need to be going. It doesn't do any good if you just think about solar winds and the education we got in supply chain. It doesn't do any good for you to be the best when upstream and downstream is riddled with a lot of vulnerabilities. So the entire supply chain, your success is depending on other organizations upstream, and other organizations downstream are depending on your success. This is a collaborative effort that has to be done simultaneously across the board. Let's just say the federal government aced this and got it right, and the private sector didn't do anything. So, it's not going to work. We all need to be doing this together, and we all need to be traveling at the same rate of speed with the same understanding that this is where I'm at and this is where I need to be.
Yeah, Kavitha, you might have just had 2 quick points but I couldn't agree more. And it is, while you have to have funding and personnel and procurement vehicles that work, right? You have to have that, right, as enabling functions. You also have to have leadership for the culture change, and you got to keep this thing at the right level. And if you don't, all those other things will be the stuff that sort of beats you. as David's laying out. And that's why we've been managing these transitions at the sort of deputy secretary, COO level. I mean, sure, the CIOs are lead, but they need to be empowered and enabled across the mission and the business side when those hard changes come up and like when there's resistant forces. And we've seen it time and again, but we're using data visualization. Data is key in this, where you can just kind of show everybody like here's where you're at. You can scorecard people, measure them against each other, and you can use culture to your advantage as well.
No, absolutely.
Let me build on what Chris said. Change leadership. Everybody talks about change management. Okay, we got that. We got books on that. We got YouTube videos on it. Change leadership is not being given the proper due. Change leadership, the evangelizer, the advocate, the person that stands up and says, this is where we're going and this is the pace in which we're going to go. Jen Easterly, the director of CISO, is an example of that. After you believe in change leadership, the word that comes to mind after that is continuity. Who's going to come in behind Jen? Who's going to be the leader after that? And when these political winds change and the leadership changes at the federal and the state level, the next president, are they going to have the same commitment to cybersecurity investments and priorities? Well, I hope so. And I hope maybe they would even be greater. But continuity can take the breath out of any initiative that's there when there's a change in leadership and a change in direction. Change leadership and continuity of that leadership.
Let's unpack that a little bit. I mean, there's change leadership and then there's career security, right? And you had touched upon that before. And, it's change leadership, I think, and, from an advocacy visionary perspective is absolutely necessary when you're looking at revolutions like we're looking at, right? We're going through technology revolutions that are tremendous in our lifetime, right? I mean, we haven't even touched upon ChatGPT yet and what that means, but these are massive waves and shifts. But then you also have the everyday technologist or the operator in their roles who has spent 25, 30 years being trained on something. And they've spent the majority of their career buying technology or equipment and that they're very comfortable with. It's given communities, job security, telling them that is no longer, or having them make that pivot is a massive undertaking, right? So cultural change, as Chris, you put it, I think it weighs as heavily as a technology change, a process change. I don't know if you were going to comment, Chris, on that.
Well, it is true. It has been true. I think the thing that we as leaders are going to have to grapple with is generative AI and the advances that are coming there to disrupt cost models and basically every, not just business, but organization, government organizations, nonprofits, it doesn't matter. We all have cost models. These are all about to be disrupted by this technology as it goes past the chat use cases. And, the thing is like, we're going to have to figure out how to lead through it. There's no more optionality. The pace is going to just go like skyrocket. And people are going to have to learn how to use that technology to do their jobs successfully. And I think what I'm saying is we've always had this problem. I think it's about to get worse. And as far as something that needs to be addressed, if it isn't taken head on, is kind of what I'm saying, it's going to get worse. But I think there's a ton of opportunity to bring people along with it. I think there's lots of positive opportunity to make people's jobs and lives easier. And I've heard some folks like Laura Nossenberger, she was recently left, the CIO at Air Force. She did such a fantastic job of like talking positively about zero trust changes and just doing it the right way. I don't think I'm there yet, but I really respect the way she talks about it, because it's not intimidating. It's just sort of helpful. And it's bringing people into the fold of like wanting to engage with it. And I think that's right. I think we're all going to have to kind of learn how to do that a bit better. And I include myself in that.
I think it warms my heart to hear you say that, because it's one of the things here at Zscaler as a company, and especially my organization, that we've really focused on is, forget the sales, forget the marketing, forget all that. How do we get you talking to your peers? How do we have more of these revolutionaries, as we call them, out in the forefront, talking about how they have embraced IT transformation, how they've embraced secure transformation, how they've embraced and pioneered some of these zero trust journeys in their different sectors, different verticals, in different roles, and how they've seen positive outcomes, right? Really stories from the trenches, creating these communities and these exchanges where we can talk about these things. So we have 100, 1,000 names of people. So people aren't going to be so afraid to stick their neck out and go, you know what, I'm going to go do this. Because it's a road less traveled, but people have done it. There are success stories, and I can learn from that. And I potentially don't have to repeat some of those mistakes that they have undergone. And and I know there's a lot of cross-agency, communications that have to be privy, right? Like they're confidential, but there is enough to be able for us to be able to create sort of best practices in the industry and share them. So that goes to like my next quick topic around private and public sector collaboration. And David, you touched upon that quite a bit by saying, look, we all have to coexist, and we can't push the onus back on the private sector and just say, okay, private sector, you're not responsible for everything you build and sell us. If something happens, then you're on the hook. It's a joint responsibility model, right? In terms of what we build and transfer to the public sector, and then how the public sector also ingests and operationalizes some of this. So it's a supply chain, we're an ecosystem that has to coexist, and we have to build for some of these corner cases. But I'd love to understand it. I think specifically around, partnerships like the JCDC, right? Can we talk a little bit about how that can play a role in, enhancing our critical infrastructure cybersecurity? David, you, and then potentially Chris as well.
Yeah, I was again complimenting Jen Esterly when she created a joint cyber defense collaborative, and all in the intent of sharing information across public and private sectors. I believe it's in its early phases of success, but they've got miles to go to become interdependent on the information that they have, and I'm going to guess they probably have 10% of what they really need. I don't think they're really sharing as well as they should be. And there's always reservations in how much they can share based on lawyers, based on stock price, based on whatever factors inhibit them from sharing. But it's a place to start. She named the organization. She's got the members of the organization. And I think there's a matter of trust that has to be established in the relationships of the value that comes from that kind of an organization. Outside of the JCDC, there's also a lot of opportunities. I'm going to call this afternoon with MSISAC, again, sharing with them the whole of state strategies, trying to make sure that the federal infrastructure grant funds are being used wisely. I'm participating with 4 states right now: Wisconsin, Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. I do a cross-pollination. I sit on one call and inform the others. So I'm doing the best I can to help them understand the value and importance of whole of state when I seriously consider local government our greatest vulnerability. Federal and state are funded to be able to protect themselves. Local government, for decades of their independence, don't see collaboration as a value. So there's a significant culture hurdle that we have to overcome in being able to have them understand this too can happen to you. You would think after Atlanta, Baltimore, and even what's going on today in Dallas, they would understand that cities are targets. Cities can be crippled and can be non-functional in these attacks. So I'm hoping that some of these real life stories and examples give credibility to the importance of information sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a quick double tap on all of that. Yeah, I think that there's been efforts for years. I worked at Homeland for about 6 years, and 4 of those were in what's now called CISO. So at the time we had the NKIC, but JCDC has changed the information sharing game. And look, it'll need to continue to be minded and evolve. And back to David's really important point, continuity. It's working today, but will it work 5 years from now? We need to make sure it does.
Yes.
But it is working today. People are sharing information pretty fast there between public-private channels, and it's real information. And you look at what we're also doing on the federal side, just in bringing the signal together there. I think we have more authorities, and there's just it's just a different model than what we've got at JCDC. I mean, we actually have CISA is allowed to get the direct telemetry off of devices, from federal agencies. Okay, well, we're not quite that level of like being enabled to share at a fast or near real time way. And then, what we are able to do in the federal government is take that signal of one agency and then share it back for all. There's nothing preventing us from using federal government information to protect all federal agencies, right? There's barriers in the way, I think, to be successful. And we're creating models of like getting better and better and better at having CISA act as kind of the central government backstop MSSP that's just there to serve and provide and be eyes and ears for all. And they're getting better and better and better at that, thank goodness. How do you do as much of that as you possibly can is like sort of the JCDC like question. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of that's still voluntary. Getting back to, do we need a little bit more of like, we need to know in certain sectors and areas. And we've also had moments in time where we've seen just kind of what it can be. And we look at the invasion of Ukraine, the lead up to, and then months generally right after, the level of transparent sharing, real sharing. I personally I don't think I'd seen in that scale ever, right? And how do you bottle lightning is always like the hard question, because it's lightning for a reason, but you certainly can learn like all the things, the characteristics of what worked well, and then you try to find ways in a steady state to replicate. But I'm positive overall, because we are in a better place than we were a decade ago. There's just no question. And it's just not enough to say that we've taken this risk and it's at a manageable level. All right, that's what we're driving for. And just like other major challenges we have faced as nations over the past however many years we've been around, I should probably know that, but I've studied other things. But we need to take this risk and manage it, and we are working on it, and we're getting there. But the JCDC and the public-private collaboration, because of the distributed nature of ownership, is going to be crucial.
No, thank you for really unpacking that, gentlemen. Super helpful. We've been going for 50 minutes, 51 minutes. I think we can talk for another 5 hours. I wanted to take a question from our audience. So this question specifically is from Meritop. Once responses come in for that RFI on cybersecurity regulatory harmonization, what are the next steps in that process to create a framework for cyber regulatory harmonization? And then any insights on what that framework will look like?
Wow, those are the right questions, I think, is all I can say in that right now. What we're doing right now, it is a great question. And what we're doing right now is we're really ensuring we're well positioned to take all of that feedback, take, unstructured data, get it structured, analyze it, make sure that we're pooling it, putting it in the right place, doing follow-up, right, engagements you can all anticipate to see. But I think exactly like how that framework, comes together, I'm going to have to defer to my colleagues who are leading that effort. But also, I think that's like a little bit of a work in progress at the moment. But it's all being strategized and worked through right now while we have this moment in time of getting the RFI, results.
Most regulations, the initial reaction might be one of paralysis, but we should be designing regulations that are enabling and risk management, just woven with risk management, so they believe the regulation is good for them, as opposed to being a paralyzing event for their business. So there's a lot of critical design that needs to go around those regulations, understanding the constituents' benefit and the value. This regulation is going to help you be stronger, help you defend against a catastrophe that may come your way. So I think the adoption rate would be a lot better and a lot more simpler if it was an enabling regulation, as opposed to one that I'm going to shut you down and I'm going to paralyze you and make it very difficult for you to operate.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Before we wrap up, I was going to ask if both of you, Chris, we'll start with you, any parting thoughts for, everybody listening in on this topic, in your role, any advice you would give to your peers? And maybe we could wrap up.
Yeah, look, well, one thing I like to say is be kind to yourself if you're in this field, because it's a marathon and it's tough to not sort of have it be a sprint to sprint. And so, mind your health truly, and stay engaged in this field, because we need your expertise. There's a lot of new entrants and they need mentorship. And, as I had an old boss like to say, prevent Christopher Columbus moments of sort of thinking you've just discovered something, but you're discovering it. It's been discovered, it's trodden territory. You want to not have that happen. You want to build off of what's been coming before you so that we keep making progress at pace. So, I think it's just really important to kind of focus on that, like stay with this, mentor others is a really important lesson through this. And the second thing that I would say is, I get it. If you're in a business, you've got your priorities, you got lots of stressors, you're focused on things. Some of this stuff doesn't make sense to you. Why do I need to report what's happening to me to this federal government? What are they going to do for me? What are they going to give me back? What information is going to help make better strategic business decisions for me? I'm on it. I'm doing my job. I've got this. I don't get it. And what I'd say to that is, that's, to me, that's not thinking about the world which we live in. That's not thinking about the fact that that central point needs this context so that it can do its job, which we've always been doing, always been the job of government, to protect its citizens and its residents. And we haven't had something this important before that has such distributed ownership and involvement. Okay, there's no corollary. And the reality of what we're saying to you is we need your help. And maybe it's not about you today, it's about us, all of us. And I just really think people gotta, when they're giving that feedback, when they're having those reactions, please just stop and think about it a little bit of a different way. And we would not be asking for this if we didn't think we really needed it.
Thank you, Chris, for that. Really appreciate it. David?
The leadership required for a zero trust transformation, I'll leave you with that. It's a pivot point. It's something that eventually you're not going to have a choice, and eventually you're going to have to adopt this. The old way of doing business just isn't going to get it anymore. So the change leadership topic that we talked about earlier, the continuity of that leadership and the belief in the direction is very, very much needed. I look at myself. I was at the state for nearly 8 years, and I didn't think I was going to stay that long, maybe 2, 3, 4 years. And in my latter years, I made it very important that you weren't doing it for me. You were doing it for the mission. And when I leave, you're going to continue to do it regardless of who the CIO or the governor was going to be, because you believe in the importance of the mission. This needs to be the label of zero trust transformation. You're doing it in the spirit of zero trust, making sure it's explicitly authorizing and authenticating individuals that are going to have access to some very important assets. So just remember the change leadership that's going to be required for a zero trust transformation, and making sure everyone understands the message equally as well, regardless of who the leader is at that point in time.
Thank you, David. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. I also wanted to thank our audience. I mean, we've really, touched upon so many facets of this very, very important topic. Thank you for a lot of the work that you and your organizations have been doing and continue to do. And I think we all agree we have much to do. This is a, collaborative effort between the public and the private sector. It impacts our safety, right? And our viability as a nation and as citizens of this country. And so, it's great work, good work. Thank you so much. And from all of us here at Zscaler, we want to tell you all to stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to having another conversation with you again soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Kavitha. Thank you, David.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the CIO Evolution. Check back with your podcast provider regularly for more episodes. You can find more episodes along with other podcasts on the CXO Revolutionaries website at revolutionaries.zscaler.com. Statements by Zscaler podcasters and guests are informational only and should never be construed as legal advice. You should consult your legal advisor on matters related to you or your business. Zscaler makes no warranties, express, implied, or statutory as to the content of this podcast, and it is provided as is. Content on this podcast may contain forward-looking statements that are current as of the date of the recording and subject to change. These statements are subject to the safe harbor provisions created by the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. Full legal disclaimers are available at revolutionaries.zscaler.com. Copyright 2021.